Hello everyone and welcome to the Activist Lawyer podcast. My name is Sarah Henry and I'm your host to this podcast, which offers a platform for lawyers to share their story and their journey into law and activism. Our guests will discuss the challenges and highlights of their work, as well as important cases, opinions on legal and political matters, and will offer up advice and tips for anyone interested in pursuing a career in human rights law, public interest law or criminal justice. The Activist Lawyer podcast is brought to you by the Granite Podcast Studio. Thank you so much for listening. So today I'm speaking to Aine Rice, who is a solicitor with KRW Law in Belfast. Aine works in the legacy litigation and historical institutional abuse team and is involved in civil actions against various religious organisations and state bodies regarding historical abuse. Now, what we talk about today relates to mother and baby homes and of course other similar institutions across the island of Ireland. We'll have a particular focus on recently announced Stormont legislation to establish an inquiry and redress scheme in Northern Ireland. Aine has been speaking on behalf of her clients, victims and survivors of these institutions, and of course their family members who are also in many cases deemed to be victims. And she shares the process to get to where we are at today, also her thoughts on the scheme, the redress scheme, and a broad overview of the mother and baby homes and how they operated for people who might not be familiar with what they actually are. So this topic is always going to be challenging to discuss, and we might have some listeners who are entirely unfamiliar with institutional historical abuse and the prevalence of that abuse in this country. But I will say it's a highly topical issue at the minute, and it's receiving global attention because of various developments that we touch on in the podcast. So aside from that, Aine also shares her insights into her own work, and I think very helpful advice for anyone who wants to work in human rights law. So please listen and enjoy. So hello Aine, thank you for joining me today in the podcast studio.
Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all. So just before we get into some of your work and the specific cases and issues that we're going to discuss today, I'm wondering, could you take us back in time? What made you pursue a career in law, and did you always envisage yourself working in human rights in this type of work?
For me, I think it really started when I was probably still in school. I was always really interested in subjects like history and politics, particularly when I got to A-level stage for politics. I always remember we had to look at, politics in the north and issues that occurred in the past and how the issues were addressed moving forward then. That kind of always interests me, and I suppose that kind of feeds into the line of work really that I'm involved in now. So then I went on to study law in Queen's, and through my time in Queen's I always found that I was drawn to more the human rights side of things, and particularly those kind of modules as such, they always clicked with me, and I always just found I was just naturally drawn to it, just always was interested. So then when I graduated, I knew that I wanted to go into the field of human rights. So I then started in KRW in 2021 as a paralegal, and I then completed my solicitor training there as well. And yeah, I've been there since.
You've been there since?
Yes.
And the department you're working in, I suppose you're in a particular department, but can you give us an idea of what your kind of day-to-day caseload looks like in general?
Of course. So I am part of the historical abuse and legacy litigation team. So I'm involved in High Court litigation against various religious organisations and state bodies. And also the same applies for our legacy work against various state organisations as well.
Brilliant. And just one wee add-on, I know that you've been involved in a very particular type of work. You were acting as a consultant, wasn't it? Or an advisor on the show, the Northern Ireland TV show Blue Lights. How did that come about?
Yeah, so that was a really great opportunity, and it was absolutely brilliant to be involved. So really that came about, and the creators of the show got in contact with ourselves, and basically there was a storyline about a newly qualified solicitor dealing with a legacy case. So I had to meet with Hannah McLean, who played Jen Robinson, who in the previous series was a police officer and then went down this new route. So I just had to meet with Hannah and basically go through the practicalities of doing this type of work, and really not only the practicalities but also the people side of things, and how you go through this type of case with people. And yeah, so it was an absolutely brilliant opportunity, and it was really positive as well to see that storyline being portrayed on such a brilliant show.
It was.
Yeah, it was really positive, especially because the Legacy Act was in force at that stage.
That's right.
It was great to see that was being portrayed.
Redress. And it's great, a great opportunity and experience for you.
Yeah, and they
enjoyable.
did an absolutely brilliant job. So
yeah, they did.
Yeah, it was brilliant to be a part of.
No, that was a brilliant show. For anyone who doesn't know, it's Blue Lights. I'd recommend it. I've heard great feedback from others who've watched it. But that's great. You don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, but it's a lovely, kind of add on to your work to have that experience. So, Aine, a lot of what we're going to talk about today is highly topical, highly relevant, and it's something that I've wanted to discuss on the Activist Lawyer podcast for some time. I have an interest in it because I worked in a similar area with a redress scheme affecting a boys' home and victims and survivors and their family members of that many, many, many moons ago, and I found that work incredibly difficult and incredibly challenging. So we're going to talk about mother and baby homes and, of course, the redress scheme, and really the shame and the other tragedy of what institutions, that existed for mothers and babies across Ireland. So maybe for listeners who might not be fully aware of what we're still experiencing here in Ireland in terms of the ramifications of what went on, can you describe what mother and baby homes, Magdalen laundries, workhouses were and how they operated?
Yeah, so mother and baby homes were religious organisations, state-run organisations and also charitable organisations. Okay. There's quite a range there of bodies that were involved. They were homes that unmarried women and girls who were pregnant were sent to, and essentially they spent the duration of their pregnancy there, and really they were locked away in these places for that whole time, which is shocking. And when they were there, they were often forced to partake in, physical activities, extraneous labour and things like that, quite far into their pregnancies. Also, very sadly and tragically, many, many women were separated from their children through adoptions that were facilitated by these places. Also with workhouses as well, women who had given birth were also sent to these places and forced to, again, go through very intensive physical labour while they were there.
And of course, a lot of that was supported by society at the time, and the whole shame and stigma that would have been attached to somebody who was unwed and had a baby. And other cases as well where women weren't even pregnant but had been seen to be, misbehaving or inappropriate in society, were locked away, as you say, as well.
Yes.
So it seems to be very widespread. And as you say, the mistreatment within these settings was absolutely harrowing. And we only have to look at, there's been movies on it for the past 10, 20, 30 years showing it. But when you read the actual testimonies that we're seeing now of people who are survivors, and of course people who were adopted through forced adoption, there's issues with their records, trying to find out who they are, where they were actually from, where they were born. It's an absolute travesty.
It really is. And I think the thing as well is that there were so many of them that were operational throughout the north, and even we're obviously in Newry this morning, there was one in Newry as well. And
that's right.
I think it is very close to home for, a lot of people throughout, and this is why this bill in its current form isn't fit for purpose. It excludes so many people. It's thought that 10,000 women were sent to mother and baby homes. So that's a massive group of people.
A massive group. And when you think about all of their families that
Exactly.
impacted as well. And I mentioned
Exactly.
about just hearing reading an article that popped up about, I think there's going to be a theatrical production on this, but it said that the headline of that was, there isn't a family in Ireland that isn't affected by it. And I think that's shocking to hear, but also probably quite true. So just in terms of you mentioned the redress scheme there, a survivor of the Mother and Baby Institutes that I read about recently has said that the NI executive should hang their head in shame over this Stormont legislation to establish an inquiry and a redress scheme. The scheme, as you just described, isn't fit for purpose. Where are we at with that, and why particularly do you not think it's fit for purpose? Because I know you've been working very closely with a lot of families who are affected by this.
Yes, so the bill in its current form, as you've said, Sarah, it establishes both a public inquiry and a redress scheme. The redress scheme at the moment, there is a large group of people excluded under these current proposals. So the area that people are excluded under is posthumous claims.
Okay.
So women that have sadly passed away before the 29th of September 2011 will be excluded. So their families are excluded from applying on their behalf. So when you think about it, that is a huge amount of people, particularly given that the first mother and baby home opened in the 1920s. So, it's leaving so many people out.
It's appalling, yeah.
It really is. And, they operated for such a wide amount of time. So the first one opened in the 1920s and they were operational right up until the 90s. So that's a massive period of time that people have just been forgotten about, which shouldn't be the case. The bill needs to be as inclusive as it possibly can.
Should be. Yeah, I'm sure many families are deeply disappointed. And in terms of the consultation process, how did we get to this point? And I mean, have you been working with families who've been active around this for many years, or what has your experience been in getting to this point?
So just generally speaking, to get to this point, there has been work done by so many people to get here, and people have been campaigning for years. And the bill, as it currently is, threatens to undermine all that. And that's why people,
they're frustrated.
Exactly, because it threatens to undermine all their work. So really, how we have gotten to this point is there was a research report done by Queen's University and Ulster University that was published in 2021. Following that, there was then the recommendations of the Truth Recovery Panel were published in October 2021. And then following that, last summer, the public consultation process opened. So that was summer 2024. And through that, the views of survivors were sought, on proposals, that were recommended at that stage. And the public consultation then closed. And we are now at the stage at the start of June where the bill was introduced in the Assembly in its current form, which, as I was saying,
it's not fit for purpose. No. What can be done now? Is there anything?
Well, now, obviously, it hasn't been signed into law. So now is the time to really campaign for change and to really advocate for change to that bill to ensure that as many survivors and their families as possible are included.
Well, so it's a lobbying exercise as well now, so that everybody should be really coming together to put pressure on the executive.
Yes, and I think it's important that the executive listen to the voices of survivors and their families, because they are the people that have been so heavily affected by this. And it's so important that their views are taken on board and they are listened to, because for so many years they've been continually failed by a system, and now really is the time to give them a redress scheme and a public inquiry that's reflective of their views.
Yeah, and these things as always take so long no matter where we are. And I guess you're just probably witnessing as well with your families that you're working with and your clients, this kind of intergenerational trauma, of course.
Exactly.
That kind of passes down. If somebody's been in one of the mother and baby homes, let's say 1930, 1940, that family doesn't escape that trauma as such. There's so many secrets, so much information that's unknown, so many people that don't know, their background or where they've come from until they have to go and access medical information or things like that. The other issue is records, of course, that a lot of these institutions did not keep records.
Yes, and that's something, obviously that is a major failing and something that should be drawn out in a public inquiry and should be investigated in a public inquiry. So really, it's an area that needs to be assessed and needs to be investigated.
Yeah, and I just can't believe we're still talking about that. But as you said, I know we appreciate the work that has gone on behind the scenes, and these things don't change overnight, or there's a redress scheme just doesn't come into effect. There's always going to be a long drawn out process, but it must still be so frustrating, and then not to have it at the stage that you want towards the end of the process is
it's very difficult. And another thing just about the redress scheme as it currently is under proposal stage, is that before a public inquiry there will be a standardised payment, and after a public inquiry there will be an individually assessed payment. Now, for the standardised payment that is being offered to survivors is £10,000 before the public inquiry, but for posthumous claims, that standardised payment, people applying on behalf of
someone who's passed,
they, under the current proposals, it's £2,000
because they fall into the category of posthumous claims.
So it's completely unfair.
That's a big difference.
Yeah, and there's just such an insensitivity going through everything. Yeah. It's not really inclusive, first of all, and secondly, it's not fair that there's this disparity as well. So it needs to be inclusive and fair for all victims and survivors.
Yeah, God, that's a wide gap there. And as you said, there's an insensitivity around it as well. It's quite insulting.
Yes.
Isn't it? If I feel like if that were me and you'd campaigned for so long and you've been working with lawyers or campaigners in different organisations that have been really grafting, £2,000. And I mean, of course, it's not all about the money and people aren't, but it's about it's an apology and it's redress. It's compensation. It's something that you should be entitled to for the suffering. And I'm sure when you think about how many people suffered mentally around this, physically as well, the loss of income, I suppose, comes into play, the intergenerational trauma on other family members that we've just mentioned. I mean, it just sounds so little.
Intergenerational trauma is a big point that really needs to be explored and addressed through both the inquiry and the redress scheme. As you've said, this didn't just end. When people left these places, it continued to impact their life and their children's lives and other family members' lives. And that really needs to be taken into account, the complete suffering that these individuals went through.
It really is disappointing. And of course, we're working in kind of between two jurisdictions as such, and you're looking at the north for your families and your survivors that are from here. But obviously, we'll all have an eye on what's happening in the south, and people who are following this will be familiar with, when I'm interviewing Aine today, there's actually, I suppose it's pretty harrowing stuff that's happening in terms of excavations, because not only were forced adoptions commonplace and mothers and babies separated, women locked away, forced to do slave labour for decades after this when they became institutionalised themselves and couldn't even leave these homes. They didn't know what it was like to live on the outside or to find their way in normal life, so to speak. But we also have awful cases where babies have been actually buried and their records either falsified or missing as well, which is why you will see locally and regionally, there's a lot in the news now about excavations that are happening, which I know it's linked to this. It's a different subject as such, but it's linked to what's happening here. And I think it's important to mention it in terms of the broader picture, to really emphasise how horrific this time, this period in Irish history was, and it shouldn't be forgotten because the ramifications are still highly, highly felt here today. And it's something that just, sometimes I can't believe it. I can't believe that this actually happened.
It's horrendous.
It's such a stain on society, and really nobody should be let get away with it in positions of power now. Even though we've moved on, the institutions themselves are closed, somebody still needs to answer for this.
Yeah, and I think that's what this is all about is, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, really, so many people have worked so hard to get to this point, and it's just so important that amendments are made now while they can be to make sure that people get some form of accountability from these bodies for what happened to them. Exactly.
It's the least they deserve. But really great work as well, Aine, from you. And I know there's other colleagues of yours and other firms involved in this work as well. And it's not easy. It definitely isn't easy. So on that, Aine, I mean, it's difficult and challenging to work on cases like this for anybody. I that's just a fact. It has to be. And I think sometimes you have to be a certain type of person, and you can have all of the skills in law and everything, but you still have to have that kind of empathetic attitude as well. But I'm just wondering, and it's a question we ask a lot of our guests in terms of finding that balance. How do you manage to work with cases that are difficult and challenging, but also balance that?
I think that's a really important question, and it's definitely something I feel like I'm seeing more, not just in law, but across so many other sectors. First of all, with that question against the law background, it's a privilege to be able to act for victims, survivors and their families going through really difficult times. And one thing that I'm always so conscious about is that this is for people, that come into our office, or that's a lot of people's first time dealing with, solicitors, and that in itself can be a very daunting thing, and to go through a whole civil litigation process can be so overwhelming for them. So I'm always so conscious about that, and guiding people through that process. You have to be very, as you said, empathetic, and I think that's so important. In terms of how, as you said, how that kind of balance. I hate that word, but it's it's important for our own well-being and mental health, and as we've mentioned just about being there for your clients. And I think for me personally, I always think in order to give the best version of yourself to other people, you have to give to yourself. Yeah. And I think it's really important to be conscious of looking after yourself, and so you can really operate at your peak performance as such. Yeah. I think that's really important, and it's not only beneficial for you but also for your clients as well, because you're there to advocate on their behalf and to really support and guide them through what's often a very difficult process for them to go through.
Yeah, because we've recently covered this theme on the podcast around mental health with lawyers or people in the profession in general, and well-being, and how, you know, it's very easy to forget about that. And it's not a selfish act. It's not, well, I have to look after myself. Now, we've so many people on here who, you know, they've got like hobbies outside of work, and that sounds a bit but they have to do it. That's how they release, you know, their kind of stress as well. And as you say, they come back and they're able to act, you know, to the best of their ability for their clients. And I think that's really important, and it's a really important theme to keep live, I think, on this podcast as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Because all of our guests usually work in human rights and usually act for people who are at their most vulnerable, and as you said, maybe coming to a solicitor for the first time.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's important that you're, you know, able to present in a way that you're feeling okay yourself. And I think it's okay to say that, to you know, to promote well-being within the profession. So, Aine, just another theme that runs through our podcast is activism and the law, and I'm just interested in hearing your thoughts on that in terms of, you know, you've been working for a long time now with campaigners and people who've been lobbying the government. What's your experience been, and how can activism and the law work to make meaningful change?
I think particularly with civil litigation, it can be a really important tool for survivors and their families to use to try and get accountability for what happened to them, and to get justice for what happened to them as well. So I think that's a really important tool that can be used. And also, by going through those cases, it can act as a source of strength for other victims and families that are going through that you know, that they can see how other people have went through it.
Yeah, exactly. It's that kind of strategic litigation piece, isn't it? And then, like, your work complements what they're trying to achieve, but also you need that, you know, their kind of activism to push things on as well. So yours is a perfect example, I suppose, of seeing that in action, and you're in no better place for it because your firm is so well used to that type of litigation and accessing justice for people. Yeah,
so it's been, obviously I've always worked in the firm, and since I graduated really, and it's been a really positive experience, and being able to learn from some of the best has been amazing. And we're very, very lucky that we have a brilliant team, which also I think is really important when it comes to doing this type of work as well, you know, to get as many and to get as many heads together as possible, you know, when you're faced with, you know, an issue. It's always really important, I think. It is.
And a lot of the work that your firm and other firms in a similar position that do human rights, you're facing novel issues as well. So it is good to have that team support there, where it's something that's quite novel, unique, hasn't really been done before. And I suppose it's about trying to find out, you know, the best way forward, put the best foot forward as well. So that teamwork is really important, and also important for, I suppose, when you started, you were quite young coming into the firm after college, and that's always intimidating and daunting to start a new job, but to have that support is great.
Exactly. And for me, it's been a brilliant experience being able to grow and evolve in such a positive environment, and it's been a really positive learning experience for me.
I'm delighted. And for anybody listening who thinks, well, I'd like to get involved in Aine's line of work or something similar, I'm wondering what advice you have for listeners to the podcast.
Yeah, I think for me, I always notice, particularly in our office, is people come in and do work experience, and I always think that's brilliant that people are taking the initiative.
Okay, so they come in and
at such an early stage. I think that's brilliant, and I think it's given people, you know, a real insight into the day-to-day life.
You're not just reading a book and law at your desk, it's like what actually happened.
Exactly. And I think sometimes in uni you can get quite caught up, you know, in it's all academic, whereas it's, you know, you need to see the practical side of it as well. So I think that's really important. But equally, I think, you know, if you don't have that opportunity, there's so many other different things that can help you. And I would say don't underestimate the power of transferable skills you have. You know, it can be from your part-time job. You could pick up something, even just interacting with people is so important, and just having those people skills.
Yeah.
And in terms of when you actually get into this field of work, as we touched upon it earlier in our conversation, is empathy is so important, and just being able to listen to people and, you know, appreciate that often a lot of the time as well, what people are going through, they might not have shared that with anyone else before, and you might be the first person to hear that and that they've shared that with. So being able to empathise with that individual and dealing with them in a sensitive manner is really, really important as well. And also another really important thing is teamwork. I think your ability to work in a team is really important as well. Particularly through my own experience, I've been so lucky to work in a brilliant team, and it's really helped my learning to be able to learn from so many individuals. So I think that's another really positive thing. And as well as that, I think for me as well, it was always about, I know a lot of people I know probably feel the same, as you always think, okay, I finished my degree, I then need to get a job and do my training, and it's just one thing after another, and it can feel never ending sometimes, but I would say just keep going.
You get there in the end.
And it can seem so far off, but it is very, you know. Yeah,
it's a long process, but a lot of careers are professions.
Exactly.
But as you know, you're learning as you go along, and you're getting, depending on what firm you're with as well, you're getting good experience. A lot of firms will give trainees excellent experience, or paralegals who've really hands-on experience. So it's getting in there, as you say, getting the work experience to see what it's like, because some people might go in and think, no, this is absolutely not for me. And I've seen that quite a few times, and that's fair enough, completely fair enough. It's not for everybody. And they've gone off and done something else. But it's important, as you say, despite studying law and being very good academically, it's important to get that experience. And finally, Aine, just for anybody interested in following up the work that you're doing around the redress scheme, where can we keep an eye on that?
So our firm's website will be publishing updates on that, and also through our Twitter account. So if people want to have a look at that.
That's KRW, and we'll also publish the link to the website as well. Well, look, Aine, thank you for discussing your work with me.
Thank you for having me.
It's brilliant. I really look forward to following more, and I hope we get a good outcome and a better conclusion to all of this. It's really, really important. It's something that we'll keep live, so maybe you'll come back again and fill us in on what's been happening.
Of course, I'd love to come back.
And I really wish the best for your clients and for all victims and survivors of the Magdalene laundries, workhouses and the mother and baby homes. And I suppose it's all we can do at this stage, but thank you for sharing your work.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thanks everyone for joining me today. If you like the show, please remember to share and leave a review if you have a moment. And you can also check out our website, www.activistlawyer.com, where you will see some blog articles written by our guests and contributors, as well as some fabulous Activist Lawyer merchandise.
This podcast was recorded in Granite Podcast Studio. Interested in starting up your own podcast but don't know how? Granite Podcast Studio can help. Record your podcast in our state-of-the-art studio, which is based in the heart of Newry City. Our studio has cutting-edge and user-friendly technology and can seat up to 4 people. We also provide an editing service for our team, using your guidance and editing notes to provide you with a flawless finished product, leaving your listeners wanting more. For more information on how you can get started, visit www.granitepodcaststudio.com.